And the referee again checking his watch. And there it goes! The final whistle!
Carlo Corazon will wait inside the box for this from Martin Knapp. And a header on it there, and that might have been it. That is a goal for Canada. The header was at Jason DeVos.
One last chance for Canada. Sophie Schmidt takes a deflection. Matheson is down the goal. The Twins runs for Canada.
Qualified for World Cup '86, defeating Honduras by a score of 2-1 here in St. John's, Newfoundland this afternoon.
Welcome to the Canada Soccer Nation podcast. My name is Jason DeVos. I'm the Director of Development with Canada Soccer. As always, I'm joined by Brad Fougere, Digital and Corporate Communications Manager with Canada Soccer. Brad, how has your week been so far?
Jason, how are you? It's been an interesting week. Things are busy. Return to play is here, but there's a cloud. There are some difficult discussions happening.
It's been difficult for everyone, I think, over the last week and a half. And it's a challenging time for the entire world. But I think we're at a point now where we have to have conversations about this. And you and I talk daily about the challenges that we face in work and overcoming a global pandemic. But neither of us have ever experienced what people across the globe are experiencing: racial discrimination, prejudice, the injustice of systemic racism. Where do you go to find answers? Where do you go to learn? Who do you talk to learn about this and to better inform yourself about this?
Yeah, well, this week I turned to our players first and foremost. Our players, our communications team saw that our players were amplifying Blackout Tuesday. And so we as an organization made a decision to pause all programming on Tuesday and begin to listen and amplify the voices of our players and to start to think about how we can address some of the things that we're facing. On a personal level, I struggled a lot and I found myself reaching out to an old friend from Nova Scotia, asked him if he could join us today, asked you if he could join us today, and thankfully he was able to make some time.
And he joins us now. His name is Sean Francois. Sean, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm based out of Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, youth coach. I've been involved in soccer and basketball for some time now. As an athlete, mostly just as an amateur, of course, and for fun. But having two daughters wanted me to help instill the love of sport in them as well, and became a coach. Kind of, I think, a lot of the ways that many other parents do as their kids are starting out. And I've been thankful and pleased enough to be involved with both soccer and basketball, and involved with the Basketball Nova Scotia provincial program with the U14 athletes. And also 2 summers ago became CSA C-license certified, and I'm very pleased to have that under my belt as well. So just continuing to give back to the sport and trying to have youth become as much of a fan and have as much of a love for the sport as I do, both basketball and soccer.
We've seen global discussions taking place and global protests taking place right now, sparked by the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis at the hands of 4 police officers. Tell us about your reaction to that, your thoughts on that, and what can we do better and differently to learn about the injustice that's gone on for decades?
Well, I think the biggest thing for people of color, and I can't speak for everyone, of course, where everyone's got their own opinions and their own ideas on it. But me personally, it just becomes tiring, and you're saddened and mad and shocked. Even though we've seen these things happen before, it never becomes a thing that you want to see over and over again. And unfortunately, a lot of times it feels like when we see instances like this, with Mr. Floyd's death and murder, to be quite frank, you think back to how many times it's happened, over the past decade, years beyond that, and centuries, and it becomes, really truly a rooted thing that you're trying to figure out what is the issue. And I think that ultimately what it comes down to are a lot of systemic issues that need to be addressed from a legal perspective and from a policy perspective. And it just shows the importance of not only the people's voices of those who are suffering, Black people in particular, Black men and women, but also needing the support and the understanding of people who don't look like me, people who aren't, who don't identify as a racially visible person, and how that support is needed on so many levels in order to move forward in the direction that we need to in this society.
There may be a segment of the population around the world who have never experienced what you've experienced. This isn't a new thing, is it? This is not something that's just come up this week.
By all means, not at all. It's a systemic thing. Centuries and centuries. You can go back to the transatlantic trade, slave trade, and continue forward to all the injustices that have happened. And I'm not going to be on this podcast and say there hasn't been progress, because that would be disingenuous. There certainly has been progress. The problem is that whenever there's progress made, there always seems to be factors that are holding people back from getting to a true spot of being able to propel themselves forward. And I truly feel as though collectively, if people look at what injustices there are within the laws and within policies that are out there across all countries, there's always loopholes and ways that things are being exploited that don't necessarily give people, equal footing, whether it's equality issues or equity on so many different levels. And I think that those issues never truly get looked at to the degree of which they need to be. And there's always people fighting for those issues, but I find a lot of times they fall on deaf ears, which don't then allow issues to be resolved in a timely manner. And then we continue to see this cycle over and over again.
We have an expression in our coach education department. It's part of our values that we have to listen and look and learn before we can lead. And this last week has been a crash course in listening and learning and understanding the difference between inequality and equality, equity and justice, and what that looks like. This is an important topic that deserves much more time than we're able to give it today. But we're absolutely committed to listening and looking and experiencing and learning from the experience of others who have lived experiences that we've never lived. We would love to have you back on the podcast to help lead that discussion and bring others who have experienced similar difficulties and hardships and had those tough conversations and guide us through that. Is that something that you're able to commit to with us, Sean?
Absolutely. I would appreciate that, and would love to hear many perspectives from other people, because I certainly know that I'm just one of many voices.
Well, thank you very much. And after the break, we are going to speak with Kit Selaidopoulos about the futsal program in Canada with Canada Soccer. Coming back after the break. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Canada Soccer Nation podcast. Pleased now to be joined by Kyriakos Selaidopoulos. How was that? That was a pretty good pronunciation, I think. Kit Selaidopoulos. Kit Selaidopoulos, our men's national team futsal head coach, joins us now. Kit, how are you today?
I'm doing good. How are you guys?
Good. We're doing well. You've got a webinar coming up on the weekend. I want to talk about that first. Tell us a little bit about the webinar that you have planned for Saturday, June 6th.
Basically, we're going to speak about, national team competition. We're going to say the story of when I took over the program in 2016 to where we are today. Also where we are with our national championships that grew in the last 5 years tremendously across the provinces and territories.
Good. And how has that changed the landscape? The Canadian Futsal Championship has expanded considerably in recent years. How has that changed the recruitment process for you for national team players?
It changed a lot because you get to see a lot more players than what we saw in the first round in 2016, where we only had 30. Now we're up to over 300. A lot of provinces and territories are getting involved with this, so it's very positive. They're putting in the work that it's in the men's level or youth level. Every province and territories is different, so it's good that that it's growing across the country like that.
Yeah. One of the challenges that we have in Canada is obviously the size of our country. So going across from coast to coast, north and south as well, is a challenge. What are some of the steps that you've put in place to go out and look at players across the country? So
the way I did it is I contact all the technical directors of provinces and territories. I explained them the program, and whoever wanted could have invited me to go and see players or talk to coaches or give in a coaches clinic to their coaches on site. So that's how I went with it. Very basic. At the beginning we started with 2-3, and now we're up to 9 provinces and territories that are inviting me, and we're growing the sport. And I think through that, makes the national team better, makes our CSA program better, because now it's not only Quebec and Ontario involved. Now you have Saskatchewan, you have Alberta, you have Manitoba, you have everybody pretty much involved together, pushing for the same reason to qualify for a World Cup down the line.
Yeah, and talk about that process, because obviously with the coronavirus pandemic, everything's kind of been pushed back. What's happened with respect to timelines on the Futsal World Cup and what the qualifying process is going to look like for that?
So the Futsal World Cup has been pushed back to late September 2021, and the qualifications are not out yet, but they're probably going to be sometime next year, late May. I think, like they were this time, but it falls out of situation where we thought we were ready. We were good. We had a good group together. Now we had to see the whole program and see how we're going to move forward. We're going to have guys coming back from injuries, so that's going to bring us back. But even us as a staff will be again. It gives us an extra little bit of time here to get even better and regroup and make sure that we're more prepared than what we were this time, because we were very confident of our chances.
Yeah. You mentioned that Quebec and Ontario have always had strong representation in futsal. They've always had strong programs, but the expansion of the Canadian Championships has really encouraged the other provinces and territories to implement programs to send participants to the national championship. How has that changed the makeup of the national team? Where are your players coming from? I'm told that you had players invited into camp from places like Nunavut that would never previously have had the opportunity to participate.
Yeah, so we had a camp in 2018 in Ottawa. So what I did is I took the best, the top players of the nationals of the previous year. And yes, there was a guy from Nunavut, there was a kid from Yukon, Saskatchewan, Alberta. And then you bring them all in together, and then you see where they're all at. At the end of the day, most of the players come from Ontario and Quebec, but now we're seeing the Saskatchewan player come in. We're seeing an Alberta player come in, where it's positive, and it's only going to keep on growing, and that comes from the nationals that we put up and the tournament that we put up. So it's very positive at the end of the day.
It's interesting when I travel the country and when I have calls and video calls at the moment with, clubs around Canada, we always talk about futsal as being an integral component of development in our country because of our climate. Talk a little bit about that and how that plays a role in the development of a futsal program, given the challenges we face in Canada with respect to climate.
It plays a big role, and especially out in the West where it's a little bit colder, and here that you can play, indoors for 7-8 months. Putting in the futsal, implemented it in your club. Yes, our main goal as a country is still to qualify our men's team into the World Cup. That's our main goal, and 2026 remains the big goal for everybody and for our country. But if we start putting in a little bit of futsal into the program, it's going to be a different feel. And I hear a lot of futsal and soccer is not the same thing. Well, if it's not the same thing, we're encouraging kids to play different sports. Well, there you go. It's a different sport. So why don't we play soccer and futsal instead of playing soccer and hockey? Now we're playing soccer and futsal. It's two different sports. So let's encourage kids and players to do it. And then they're still doing the multi-sport action where, studies say that at the end you have a better athlete at the end. But that's my thinking behind it.
Well, I certainly had futsal as part of my multi-sport repertoire when I was a kid. As your mobile phone's going off there, Kit. I started, and this is over 30 years ago. So in St. Thomas, Ontario, I got my first introduction to futsal, and I've been a fan of the game ever since. Very much looking forward to your webinar on Saturday, Kit. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for taking the time. Really appreciate it. And when we do resume competition, when we do get back to qualifying, all the very best in qualifying. I hope to see Canada soccer in the World Cup for futsal in 2021. Thanks for joining us, Kit.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
After the break, we'll be talking with Mike Whyatt, the Executive Director of Halifax City Soccer Club, about all things coronavirus, pandemic, the shutdown, and the resumption of soccer. Stay tuned after the break. Welcome back to the Canada Soccer Nation podcast. Very pleased to have our next guest joining us. Mike Whyatt is someone that I've known for several years now. He's the former technical director of Soccer Nova Scotia and has traded in the tracksuit for the blue suit is probably the best way to put it. He's now the executive director at Halifax City Soccer Club. Mike, welcome to the Canada Soccer Nation podcast.
Jason, how are you, my friend?
I'm good. It's been a tough week on a lot of fronts, and we heard earlier in the podcast from Sean Francois, and we'll absolutely have him back on in the future to talk about the ongoing situation around the world. It's not a Canadian issue. This is a global issue right now. But Sean Francois, don't you?
He's such a great human being. I mean, forget whatever sport he's interested in. I know he's involved in many, but as a human being, I mean, I speak to Nino, obviously, who you know, Jason, and the first thing you say is, what a dude. Yeah. Yeah,
Nino Kovacevic with Soccer Nova Scotia.
Yeah, what a dude. So yeah, no, that's really good. And he'll give you an honest opinion on the matter, and it definitely needs to be discussed. It's I can't take my eyes off the TV recently. It's just unbelievable stuff.
Yeah, you sent me a note. We were chatting the other day, and you said you're sitting down watching television, you can't believe your eyes, and it's a global issue, isn't it? For sure.
Yeah, I mean, I can't believe I can believe the response. I can't believe the behavior of certain people that are associated with leading, obviously, where it has kicked off. It baffles me, absolutely baffles me.
Well, hopefully it's going to lead to some difficult conversations, a lot of listening, a lot of learning, and change taking place.
It needs to happen.
It does, for sure. We're also in the middle of a global pandemic as we're dealing with that. And you're obviously running a soccer club now as an executive director. Tell us a little bit about that transition, going from the technical side to the executive side.
Well, it's been a strange one because it's not been it's not been a normal process. I started transitioning just in the back end of December, and I felt my race had been ran at the position at Soccer-Nova Scotia, and I kind of wanted to start to walk the walk. I've been trying to facilitate change and, trying to get it done at the club level, on the ground level. So I felt the timing was right. So, in those 2-3 months prior to the pandemic, it was just a lot around investigating our existing culture, what we're about, what we can be. And I felt we were starting to turn a corner with at least having a plan and an idea down of what I think the stakeholders in the community could resonate with. And literally, I think it was the day after, Jason, we'd just done a launch, a rebirth, if you will, of the club. It wasn't a launch of the club because it's got obviously its past history, but a little bit of a relaunch. And literally the next day, it hits hard. And from that point on, we're just in this moment of trying to pivot every single time we get new information, which is coming rapidly every day. So it's not been normal. I can't say that, I can't really sit here and say, we've done X, Y, and Z. We're just really trying to figure it out like the rest of the country, like the rest of the world is with the context of running youth sport. So yeah, it's not been, it's been something. I'll certainly write a book or a chapter about this one for sure.
Well, I can guarantee you it's going to be a case study in our coach education program and executive leadership program of the importance of planning and understanding who you are and culture. It's a great word, and you're using technology to your advantage as well at the club. Tell us a little bit about that. What are you doing online with your players at the moment?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've been listening to the show as well, and obviously Cole Horton, listening to some of the things they were doing. We've, me and the technical director, at the time when the programs got obviously postponed, we actually decided against going into the explicit kind of Zoom setting where kids would be working in a space in their home. We decided against it initially, and what we try to do is like probably many clubs, we know they still need some support and assistance with at least facilitating the exploration, the discovery of what they can do with a ball. And then really out on top of that, we wanted, if we brought them together virtually, which we do, we try to bring them not always with the context of soccer. And I think that's really what our major aim, if we go full circle to the first question, we want it to be more than a soccer club. There's a very transactional relationship with soccer, particularly our club, the culture that we have currently. And we want to make it more embedded with the fabric of that community. So, we've done things from, Jeopardy that have been general knowledge based questions. We've done bingo. We're trying to do other things. Some have been hit and miss, obviously. But the other thing that we're working on behind the scenes from an online capacity is getting ourselves in a position that when maybe we get to some level of normality, I don't think we'll ever go back to the old normal, but some normality, that we've got some content and we've got a club that we can start to make more accessible, whether it's on learning content, whether it's engagement sessions for parents. We're starting to really dive deep into that, and I think with obviously the COVID knocking down a number of barriers with people who probably have been a bit resistant to technology. I think there's an opportunity there, such as yourself, with obviously moving all your coaching courses online. We're starting to go a little deeper with that. So we've got some exciting little projects that we're hoping will be successful. But as anything, you're trying it out, you're testing things. So there's no guarantees on any of this. So yeah, we're trying, and we'll continue to pivot. We have decided, even in the last couple of days, that even though we haven't gone on to the explicit kind of organized sessions, that we still need to probably kick it into an extra gear now with the leagues being officially postponed here in Nova Scotia. So getting on the field, potentially getting one or two athletes, obviously keeping within the social distance recommendation, videoing them, and then getting that content online so that they can, copy, follow along in their own schedule. So it's been challenging, and again, I don't know if it was the right decision not to go into Zoom. I still question myself. I'm very cautious of going into the home and taking over that environment. But I think based on the length and where we're at, it might have been an opportunity miss. We shall see.
What's the feedback you're getting from your parents and your stakeholders in your club? What are they missing most about soccer right now?
Well, initially, Jason, when we started to touch base with them, a lot of them, I think, were very concerned with their personal situation. And I mean, if you look at all the different theory models, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I don't think soccer was a priority to them. I think they were concerned about their children, their education, their income. So it was we wanted to really respect and not push too hard. So we kind of just, it was gentle information, whether it's emails, social media posts, just something to try and engage them. But now that it's gone on for a prolonged period of time, people are starting to clearly miss the social capacity of the experience, whether that's obviously the players who miss their teammates. But I think, we forget that parents, that is their social circle. Some people, that is who they interact with and they, connect with in social media, on text messages, whatever it is. So I think they're missing as much as anybody else, the setting that sport and the power that sport can actually give, a community of stakeholders that are involved. So it's all social. I still hear from a number of people though that are honest and say, look, it's the social distancing programming isn't soccer. We can do it at home, but we'll be keeping an eye out, and we'll certainly be back when there's more movement there. So again, it's hit and miss. I would say if we were to go into a social distancing program, if based on our intel and our touch points with our membership, we'd probably be less than a third of our regular membership. So that causes its own problems. So.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge that everyone's dealing with right now. It's very difficult to map out what a return to normality is going to look like. The concept of playing games against other clubs right now is a little bit down the road for sure, and it's longer down the road in some parts of the country, simply due to the public health authority restrictions that are in place. Moving forward as a club, how do you pivot towards that? How do you change what you do? And what have you learned through this process where you've been enforced to close your doors and shutter your programs and not offer programming? What have you learned about how you do things that you might change moving forward?
Oh, it's a big question for a podcast. I mean, again, there's still so many unknowns with how we're going to pivot in the current climate, and I think not knowing that has been probably the most difficult problem with my job anyway, just that uncertainty. I think when it all comes full circle, and if I'm answering the question correctly, I think there needs to be a reset. I think there's an opportunity for a reset. I think we need to recognize that, the sport of what kids are missing is not the things that I think we as adults sometimes value. And kids, some of the kids that we've reached out to, and some of the I'm actually involved with a potential research group in Michigan, and some of the feedback that we're getting from people is like, travel fatigue. Kids don't miss that right now. So if we have a club and we are trying to access competition, I think we do need to be extremely sensitive and thoughtful around, well, how does competition look when we come back? And I think us as a club, we have a responsibility to drive that discussion. Otherwise, we'll just go back to the same way. So it's important that we collect and get that feedback from the membership so we can provide some input to those that are responsible for running competitions, to ensure, for example, that they're not in the car more than they're, playing a game of soccer. So those are certain things that I think will certainly emerge from this. From another side, in the sense of the club, I think the next couple of phases, as you said, before we get back to competition sake, is going to probably be, more so very small club programming, maybe internal programming like house league. And, I think for some reason we've kind of stuck our nose up at that. I don't know how that's happened over the last decade or so, but there's something that's really pure about that. And I think, when you really think about what the kids are missing, we can achieve so much in that domain. So I think we really need to start looking at that again. Do we need to be spending thousands upon thousands of dollars playing, a sport? And there's going to be a clientele that's certainly going to want that and look for that. And there's going to be a market for that. But I think for the vast majority, Jason, I think we're just looking at how do we use soccer as a mechanism to help people with what it is they want to be, whether it's an athlete, whether they just want to have a positive sporting experience and get the benefits of being a part of a sporting an environment. And how do we create that in a way where it is accessible and fun and safe? And that's really as simple as it is. So we're literally looking at everything we've done and gone, okay, we're going to try and look and reset this. Now, granted, it's not what I think. It's not necessarily what my technical director, Kieran, thinks. And we need to get input from the membership. So we need to keep investing in our culture and figuring out what it is they do want. But, I think if we ask the kids, and that's probably the mistake we continue to make, we ask the parents, we need to ask the kids, we'll probably be surprised by their answers.
Yeah, it's fascinating when you look at some of the research that's been done in that space. Amanda Visick's work obviously jumps to mind about fun maps and what kids consider to be fun about sport, and specifically our sport. You often get a different response than what you might necessarily hear from parents if you ask them. And winning in the competition isn't as high up the priority list for children as we maybe think it is. And what I've seen and what I've heard from talking with clubs and academies across the country, and even from being a parent, is that my kids are a lot older than your kids. You've got two youngsters, but I've got two teenagers. What they miss is they miss their friends. Yep. They miss being able to hang out with their friends. And soccer at the grassroots level has always been a great unifier of people. It brings kids together to become friends, to meet new friends. It brings parents together to make new friends with each other on the sidelines. And I think that's one of the big pieces that's missing from our game right now. And that's what everyone's craving. And the reason why they want to get back to playing games and having some form of a soccer experience is that they want to have those relationships reestablished. Your background is not from Halifax, Nova Scotia, although you have picked up a little bit of an East Coast lilt to your voice over the years, I think. Tell us a little bit about where you're from and what football, as it's called back in the UK. When did you get hooked on football? Yeah, so I come from originally Nottingham, England. I'm a only child. Single parent family, as my friend Stuart Neely can understand what that does when you are an only child. Sometimes you live in a very unique way of thinking, but going through that, it was interesting. My mother, who it means the world to me, it was so great, and I think back on reflection on how she was able to kind of manage, but the role of kind of, and again it was the traditional role of like the father/mother figure, and she did it all. She was fantastic. But one of the things that she always allowed me was just to go and explore, and I think as an only child you've got no choice. At times you're on your own. So my first experience really with football was more so just seeing it on the telly, being absolutely fascinated by it, and just going exploring them by myself. I mean, I can remember still to this day just making up games in the back garden, playing points against an imaginary person and just going for it and just letting my imagination go, because at the time there's not everybody's accessible to you whenever you choose. Obviously you have friends, which you'd be able to create better environments, but I just remember it so vividly, and it probably is why it's affected me professionally around the importance of play and what that can do. And then eventually you start to stumble into your local clubs,
I played for my school. I was like probably 99.9% of youngsters playing soccer or football in England. You think you're going to be a professional footballer, and you realize you're just actually not that good. But you love it. You love it so much. You want to be involved in it in some capacity. And I knew I absolutely adored what it was, and what it did for me. And it was so important for my childhood. So I continued to explore my badges when I was in the UK. I was fortunate on the back of the sport to travel many continents across the world. Obviously on that, I managed to meet my wife in my travels. And, from there, I knew that I wanted to be involved in sport. And I actually hadn't made my mind up at that point that it had to be football. Obviously, football was my preference, but knowing the landscape, as you know as well, Jason, it's quite an exclusive setting, football in England. You've got to have a pedigree of at least being played. It's starting to change a little bit, but that was definitely the way it felt when I was going through the system. So I went to university and I studied sports development. I took a Bachelor of Arts in Sports Development. And, I think that experience was critical for when I actually decided to come over to Canada and get involved in trying to help build the sport in Nova Scotia particularly, and obviously with yourself on a national level. It just gave me a set of tools that I look around and I see many of my colleagues who at times are just figuring it out because they've just played. They were a good player. They were, maybe a very good AUS player or whatever it is. And, they get hired for these roles. And, I had some tools, and I think it just allowed me to maybe see what the sport was capable of doing, not just on the on-field capacity. And then the rest of it from there, I've just been super curious from that day on. And I got here, tried to figure out the system. I call it my apprenticeship of Canadian soccer was in Sydney, Cape Breton, which I wouldn't change for the world. It was a magnificent experience for me. We don't necessarily want to admit that soccer is full of politics, but it is. And, when you're dealing with some of the local politics between, for example, HRM and rural parts of our province, it was very fascinating to me. So I was learning on the job with that. And it's been a not really like some of your other guests you've had. It's been a pretty standard experience for me. It just wasn't that good. And I just stumbled into wanting to explore more.
Which side of the Nottingham Derby do you fall on?
Well, I'm actually neither of the clubs, but I did work for Nottingham Forest in their community program. So I would have to say a red. But, there's something unique about the black and white side. The history of the club in itself is, and obviously they're going through some difficult times, which is really, I hope they get through it.
There's a lot of clubs, I think, are in that boat globally right now, just because of the situation that they're dealing with. One of the things you mentioned there that we've transitioned is coach education moving into more of an online format.
Yeah.
You've worked with us now as one of our very talented coach educators. What have you learned through this process of coach education and coach development? As a facilitator, as a coach developer, what's the biggest takeaway for you over the last couple of years?
Well, I mean, I love anything to do with the sport. If we're making an impact on any person, it's such a rewarding opportunity to be in this position. At times, I think I have to pinch myself. There's days where, as you know, Jason, you like this job, but there's really we're in football and we're trying to help people. The coach education side of it, the facilitation side of it, for me is it's my most favorite part of the job. I absolutely love it. I love being with other either young adults or even experienced old dogs, if you want to call it. Just again trying to be vulnerable, trying to be curious. And what I've noticed from when I first started, and I actually sat a course, is it literally has done a 180 for anyone who's been on a Canada soccer course and is seeing, some of the promotion of what's coming forward and maybe have got some scars there. I can tell you from just sitting and seeing it with my own eyes, it's a complete 180. It's such an individualized process now. Trying to meet people where they are and not trying to force them to be something that they're not. And my experience, and it's been great because I've learned through all of the different leaders of our coach education program, and I've taken many things from all of them. But it's such a really good time to be in this country and working as a facilitator, because it's nothing more gratifying just watching somebody that you're supporting go through the process, be curious, consistently ask questions, and you build such a bond and a relationship with them if you're able to do it that way. Whereas before, I can only imagine, I was on courses and it just felt like there was a brick wall up with people, and I'd have hated to be on the other side if I was being honest. So it's definitely gone 180, Jason. For me as an individual, I have completely recognized that. And I hope it never leaves me, and I hope I never get arrogant enough, but I still know nothing. I learn from everyone that's on the course. There's people on there that come from different backgrounds, but yet the skills that they have are still transferable to our domain, and just getting the opportunity to have dialogue and probe, and it's absolutely brilliant. So I love that part of the job. If it was something that I could just immerse myself in, that would be fantastic. But there are the most jobs like we have in Canada, it's a hybrid, so we have other things we have to do which are just as gratifying. Yeah,
it's that it's those opposed positions of you're the coach educator, you're there to develop people, but they're looking at you as the expert. And I think the traditional model has always been the teacher knows everything, the student knows nothing. The teacher is going to give the student the knowledge when the student's good and ready. And the teacher is going to make that determination. But what we've learned over the years, I think, is that that's not how people learn. They learn through experience. They learn through doing. They learn through being met at the point of learning that they're at, not where you want them to be. And I think that's for me the most exciting piece, is when the learner has the aha moment where the light bulb goes off and you can see it in their eyes and they get it. And that spark is really what then fires the next question, the next question, the next question. And if the desire to learn is there, because you've created a safe environment for them and yourself to be vulnerable, because that's a key piece in all of this. If you're not vulnerable, you can't learn. You have to be willing to admit, I don't know anything. And that goes for the coach educator as well as the coach. So we're going to go on a journey together where we're both going to explore something, and I'm going to learn something as a coach developer, and you're going to learn something, and hopefully we're going to learn from each other. That's one of the things I always say at the start of all of our courses is we're on a journey now. We're a group of people. We're going on a journey, and hopefully we're going to learn as much, maybe more, than you learn through this process. And it's mutual learning. With that in mind, you've started a very exciting project in the last couple of weeks, if not months. You've started a podcast. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So it's the Learning in Development podcast. You've been a guest twice, so we thank you for that.
Why have you called it Learning in Development? Let's start with that.
Well, I mean, first of all, one of my, several mentors, which is Mark O'Sullivan, he's, somebody that I'm sure many people listening have either heard of or have been exposed to. We started off just, wanting to talk and have a chat about, development in general. And then through, again, just it emerged through conversations, we were calling it the ramble at first. And, we just had a chat with, I think at the time when we changed it might have been the two gentlemen who were currently working in the football methodology at Barcelona, but we just started to talk about that, development, and we're talking from the coach's side point, like we're all just trying to optimize our development. Like we're all learning all the time. It's not, that it's just the players are learning. It's the coach is optimizing their approach. It's, it was us as podcast conversation. And then eventually we just said, it's learning in development. You are learning whilst you're developing. It's learning in development. And, Mark's the brains, probably behind most of the slogans, to be fair. Not many times we can say that about an Irishman in Sweden, but he is the brains when it comes to that. And yeah, it's stuck. And I think it's such a fitting setting because we keep talking about like teaching, and we're just learning. We're all at different points. You've said it before. You said it. I've said it, Jace. Like, no, there is no destination here. It's a journey, and we're just trying to go through it. And there's so many things influencing us externally, internally. There is no right way of doing this. So we're just learning as we're developing, and that is pretty much it. And I think if we can get that message out, and that's hopefully something I want to get out to my stakeholders and my community, is if we can be vulnerable, create a safe space to have that mindset. You know, there's a lot of brilliant things that we could probably do together. But again, we've got a long way, I think, to go in many parts of our sport, because there is that notion of, you know, there's a destination and I am the expert, and we've got to get away from that. Yeah. Yeah.
I was listening to your latest podcast episode as I was walking my dogs last night, and you had some interesting guests on. You've had some really good guests. Vlad from the Sports Institute of Finland. I'm not even going to try and pronounce his last name, because
no, me neither.
Much like you, I think I would probably not do it justice. Martin Volk from Calgary West Soccer Association, who you used to work with in Nova Scotia. You had Jordan Kelly on as well from USA Volleyball. And the conversation that you had, one of the talking points revolved around culture and understanding culture. Talk a little bit about the importance of that and the work that you do. Why does it matter? Why do you have to understand your own culture before you can learn and educate?
Yeah, spot on with the guests, Jason. We've had many more, and it's been brilliant PD for me. I literally sit on the front row seat and just ask questions and come across as not knowing anything, and you know, you get these absolute golden nugget of conversations where you go away wanting more, and the culture one it keeps coming up, and I think the reason why culture keeps coming up is because everyone's looking for the silver bullet. They think it exists, so they're looking at other cultures. They're looking at the Dutch model. They're looking, you know, when Croatia in the final, you know, there's a book out. It starts, you know, bestseller on Amazon within hours around the Croatian way. And all of these different models are out there, and people consistently try to take them and embed them within their culture without understanding where the model comes from. And that's really what sparks the conversation. But then when you go a lot deeper, if you're going to be effective at what you do, and we are in the amateur sport industry, and we're dealing with community sport, you know, you have to investigate your culture. You have to know what you are, where you are, what you're capable of, what your people have been through. And if you don't understand that, whatever you plan, whatever you build, you know, it's probably not going to stick. It's not going to carry. And that's the same with these game models, you know. So if you chuck in the Dutch way in Canada, well, there may be certain things within it that certainly can transfer, you know, some of the principles, but the notion that you can literally just carbon copy it, it's not going to work. It's just not going to work. We're completely two different cultures and societies. So we keep going, we keep exploring it. I mean, Martin, you mentioned a good friend of mine who's sad. It was sad to see him leave, but it's great for Alberta soccer to have him. You know, questions such as if the values that I carry don't align with maybe the values of the organization. We've both been in situations where that's occurred. What do you do? And again, just coming up with ideas where, you know, they probably do align to some degree, some of your values. It's just, how do you facilitate that? What's the process? You know, you can't tell them, and you need to take them on a journey with you, be vulnerable. And it comes to a lot of the same stuff. You know, around being vulnerable, about, you know, knowing that there's no answer. So yeah, we talk a lot of stuff that it's quite deep, it's quite heavy at times. I mean, sometimes I get lost in some of the dialogue, and I have to even re-listen, because you know, there's some very smart people with a lot of different experiences, like as you mentioned, Vlad from Finland, and we've had, we were lucky to have Jennifer, obviously her background is in academics, and we've had Deb from in England, who's basically a human rights lawyer, and she's trying to fight for kids' rights within sport. So it goes quite heavy, but again, it really puts it into, for me, the experience of being a part of the podcast, the show, it just puts things into perspective that, yes, we love soccer. It's what brings us together. And it's what's probably why everyone wants to be there, but what it's actually capable of doing, if we're willing to take a big step back, is so bigger than the actual sport in itself.
Absolutely, it unifies the world. You look every couple of years. Every 2 years there's a major World Cup, men's or women's, and it unifies the world. And I think that's also one of the things that people are really missing right now. Is it has this power to bring everyone together. You touched on something there that I think is really important. Is that concept of vulnerability and curiosity. And I think, going back to the earlier discussion with Sean Francois around the racial tension that exists globally right now, is a lot of people are having really hard conversations because they're going out on a limb and saying, I don't know anything about this. I know nothing. And I think that's the starting point of learning, is admitting that you don't know anything and that you're there to listen and learn from people who have experience that you maybe don't have. And I think that's a crucial piece of any project like this, like you're going on, learning and development, your podcast, any resources that you go to, whether they're books, whether they're webinars, and you can find so much good content out there right now. But the starting point is saying, I want to find out more about this. I need to learn more about this so I have a better understanding of it. So I think that's crucial. What's next for you? I mean, obviously you can't predict the future. You can't tell us when the pandemic's going to pass. If you could, that would be great, because then I think we could all plan accordingly. But what's next for you personally, professionally, as a club, and where do you go now?
Well, Jace, I mean, I imagine you get a lot of people who are leading clubs or in some capacity leading clubs, and I'm pretty sure the next thing that I say they'll be able to resonate. This has been these last 12 weeks have been tough. I mean, I from a personal standpoint, I'd be lying if I did say my mental health has not been affected by this. I have good days, I have bad days. The uncertainty of what will remain or what will be is so hard. Like, we're just waiting to see if the wage subsidy program is going to be even extended, or will our industry allow it to be extended if we're so hit so hard. If that's not the case, are we then going to be made redundant? All of that stuff is real, and we've got families, so that stuff's quite terrifying. So you do start to go, am I in the right industry? Is there going to be another pandemic soon? So I'd be lying if I didn't say I wasn't thinking about that, because I have 2 young daughters, I have a wife, and where we work to provide, and that's the reality. So it's a real problem, and I'm sure many people listening can resonate with that. So that's concerning. I feel for the kids. That's on me. I really do feel for the kids. I think, your grade 12 kids who are trying to transition out of high school into, university, they're now being affected. I know that's hitting some of them quite hard. So I feel for those kids. More on a more personal level, Jace, it's been great to actually recalibrate with the family. Like many people in the industry, I'm sure you go all in because you love the sport. You're so fortunate to be involved in the sport that you sometimes forget that you have a family. And I'm so
it's on or off, isn't it? There's no middle ground. Yeah. You're either full on 100% going to do everything to the max, or you're not, and there's no middle ground.
Yeah,
and it's always the family that suffers because of it.
Yeah, and I'm so thankful that I got the chance to basically have a long, hard look at myself and reflect on maybe the behavior and actions that I have in not on purpose, but more so that has probably affected them. So that time this time that has been so difficult, don't get me wrong, has been uncertain. I wouldn't change it for the world, because I've been able to recalibrate that part of my life. Professionally, Jace, honestly, I don't know. I'm going to continue to keep myself busy, be curious. I'm excited to help continue to facilitate online with yourself and Canada Soccer. And, as I'll let it emerge, I guess, and plan and just see what happens. But until we don't have that clarity, it's really difficult for me to say anything. We just got to try and be innovative and pivot with the times.
Yeah. Lastly, where can people find you if they want to follow you on social media? Where can they find your podcast? Give us the Coles notes.
Yeah. Twitter is at Wyatt. Wyatt spelt the right way. Sorry for anyone who disagrees. WHYATT, not WY. And then the podcast, if you go on any of the major platforms and put learning and development, you will find it. And again, we have video feeds of the calls as well. That if people want to check that out, I think the channel right now it's actually just my name, Mike Whyatt 84. So they can check that out as well, Jace. And then email, they can find me on Halifax City's Soccer's website. I'm always keen to talk to people who are also keen to have conversations. So,
well, listen, Mike, keep up the great work. Most importantly, stay safe, keep the family safe, keep the kids busy, keep them active, keep kicking a ball, and keep up the great work. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, you too, mate. Thanks a lot, buddy.
Awesome. After the break, we'll connect with Brad, get his thoughts and reflections on today's episode, and talk a little bit about what's coming up next week. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Canada Soccer Nation podcast. Brad Fougere joins me now for his thoughts to wrap up the episode. Brad, what was a big takeaway for you today?
Yeah, today was a tough show. Nice to finish with Mike. Mike is an extremely thoughtful person, and as I was listening to him talk and having had Sean on earlier in the show, obviously the Nova Scotia pride in me started to rise. Just so many great people have come out of Nova Scotia, and the Stephen Hart, Danny Worthington, the Mike Hudson, Suzanne Muir, Mary Beth Bowie, Antti Jazic, young Jacob Schaffelberg. Right? There's a long list of people. Mike obviously was doing great work at Soccer Nova Scotia.
Brad Fougere.
No, get out of town. But having been a Dartmouth United guy myself, Mike moving to Halifax City wasn't the most pleasing thing that I saw happen. But yeah, Mike's podcast is amazing, and I knew that Sean and Mike had worked together, so that was part of the reason that I wanted us to have that conversation with Sean early days. But specifically on Mike, the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know is something that must resonate with so many coaches. I can only assume that people heard, him talk about that and thought to themselves, yeah, wow, you go into things thinking, I know this game, and you learn something from a coach and you're like, okay, great. Now my toolbox is a little more full. And then you get into a learning environment and you see that everyone's toolboxes are overflowing, and it's just a shocking thing. To realize, how little, the more you learn, the less you know, ultimately, is what it boils down to.
I can only speak about my own lived experience because it's the only one I've lived. But when you're an ex-pro and you go on to a coaching course, it's a scary place because you're looked at by non-pros who haven't played the game at a professional level as being an expert, when the reality is you're a complete novice when it comes to coaching. Playing and coaching are not the same thing. Yes, you have a background in the game. You understand the game at a very high level. You've lived the game for maybe decades. But when it comes to actually teaching the game and coaching sessions, most ex-players are very, very raw and very nervous and very new to that. So, you get slapped in the face very quickly when you take your first coaching course and you have a realization that, wow, I don't know anything about this. I'm a novice. And most players, what they do is they dive into it. Like they just become insatiable and they want to learn and they want to get better and they want to be the best coach that they can be, just like they wanted to be the best player that they could be. That's the most common reaction. But sometimes you'll get the opposite. And it really is the ones who have an open mind and are willing to be a little bit vulnerable to say, yeah, you know what? Maybe I played professional soccer, but you've coached for a decade and you're more knowledgeable as a coach than I am. Maybe I can learn from you. And that's where I feel like on a coaching course, you get a really, really good synergy in the classroom when you have open-minded people willing to be vulnerable with each other and go on that learning journey together, rather than separating them, saying, I'm an ex-pro and you're not. So by default, I know more about the game than you do. Those types of mindsets generally lead down a bad path. So it's one of the things that I keep seeing over and over again when we're working with ex-players coming into our coach education program is that they realize what they need to learn, and it's a lot. And they come into it with a really open mindset, and that generally leads to success. They may not necessarily go into coaching. They may not be driven towards being a coach. Rhian Wilkinson's a great example. She admitted to us, I didn't really want to be a coach, but once I got in and I started doing it and I started learning, I got hooked on it. And now I love it. And look at how she's thriving in that environment.
I remember having aspects of this conversation with you on the sideline of a B license course that had Carmelina Moscato and Julian de Guzman,
Dwayne De Rosario. Yeah, right. They were all there.
I remember us discussing this. But I want to zero in on the vulnerability piece, because that was part of what you said to me that day. You come in, you're a pro, you're expected to know everything, but you need to be vulnerable and recognize and admit out loud. And really, that's the theme of what it was that drove us to have the conversation that we had off the top. There's a need for folks like you and me to go to a space where we don't know how to lead that conversation. And I know, you have been.
I'm in that space right now.
Right? I don't know
how to lead that conversation.
And it's a really tough thing to happen. And I think it's a really important thing for us to have done. I feel like the preseason is over for us, Jason. I feel like this was the beginning for us.
Yeah. This was the first. This was the really first difficult away game where we got thumped.
Right.
And now we're coming back on the bus and we're realizing we're not just going to walk away with the championship here. We've got a lot of work to do. I want to thank Sean for coming on at short notice, because these are difficult conversations to have, but I feel like they're imperative, that we have to have these discussions. I was lucky a couple of weeks ago, we facilitated a workshop with 10 women who have been involved in the game and are currently involved in the game at a high level. And just sitting and listening, the introductions for the 10 women, it took 2 hours for them to introduce themselves to each other. And my staff and I were just sitting there listening and taking it all in and trying to understand better their lived experience in our soccer system and the inequality that they have fought against for years and for decades. And you can't help but come away from a conversation like that and say to yourself, we have to fix this. We have to fix our system so that all people, have the same opportunity, the same access to tools and opportunities as everyone else. And right now, even within our system, we don't have that. We have to hold our hands up and say that we don't have that. So we have to do more. And I feel like the starting point for that, Brad, is that we have to listen. We have to listen to those voices. We have to listen to those stories, the lived experiences, and ask those individuals, what can we do to help? And that for me is a starting point, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. One of the other things that I was thinking about was I remember Stu put together the coaching course for the Aboriginal group on Vancouver Island. There are many underserved communities that are out there that we can learn from, that we can listen to, that we need to be vulnerable on their behalf. And I'm glad that we've decided to do this and to have the discussions about it and to involve folks like Sean. So I'm looking forward to it. Now, I would be remiss to say that I'm also looking forward to next week's show.
Yes, it's going to be a good one. It's we're coming up to the 2-year anniversary of the United bid being awarded the 2026 World Cup. And that day was a very memorable day for Canadian soccer, and the opportunity to be part of that tri-country bid and to win the rights to host the event is a special one. And we're going to have some very special guests joining us. Peter Montopoli, General Secretary of Canada Soccer, one of the driving forces behind the bid committee. Peter is going to join us to have a chat. We will also be joined by the president of CONCACAF, the vice president of FIFA, and the former president of Canada Soccer, Mr. Victor Montagliani, to talk about the global game and what hosting the World Cup means for Canada, the United States, and Mexico. So stay tuned for that. It's going to be a really interesting discussion. There's a lot of people who didn't get fanfare, who never got their names in the headlines, who put in countless hours of work to ensure that bid was successful. And many of them work in Canadian soccer for Canada Soccer. So we'll be celebrating that and talking about what the 2026 World Cup could do for this country and what kind of an impact it can make. So that's coming up next week. Really excited for that one. But as always, thank you for listening. Stay safe, look after each other, be nice, be good people, be good Canadians, and we'll see you next week. Take care.